Henry, an elderly widower, looks forward to spending Christmas with his son, Mark, and daughter-in-law, Kayla, but they leave him to party elsewhere. In his loneliness, Henry discovers that his wife, Lila, has secretly left him a cabin and a trust fund to protect him from his own son and daughter-in-law if they try to seize the property. Before we start the story, leave a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And at the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. Hey there. Delivery for Henry Cole. The kid on my porch couldn't have been more than 20 cheeks red from the December wind, a red windbreaker zipped to his chin. Behind him the lawn was silvered with frost, and the gold lights I'd wrapped around the porch rail glowed like they were holding their breath. "That's me," I said. He handed me a thin envelope, nodded once, and clattered back down the steps. His shoes made a gritty crunch on the frozen path, and a few seconds later the cough of a small engine faded into the quiet. The envelope was warm from his hands. Thin. I knew before I opened it that it wouldn't be good news. Inside, on a single sheet of heavy paper, was Kayla's careful handwriting. "Henry, we decided to spend Christmas at my mom's this year. Hope you understand. Kayla, no exclamation mark. No Merry Christmas. No, we'll stop by later. No call me tonight. Just the decision tidy as a receipt." I stood in the doorway a moment longer, the cold needling my face, and let the porch lights smear a soft halo over the steps. Lila would have been standing just behind me if she were still here. She never could resist peeking to see who was at the door. "Curiosity keeps you young," she'd say. Since July, the house had been learning how not to echo her voice. I closed the door, and the quiet folded itself around me. From the entryway, I could see the dining room bright beneath the chandelier. I'd polished the table until I could see the crystal's reflections dancing on the wood. The china we only ever used on holidays, white with a thin, stubborn gold rim, was set at 3 places. I'd folded the cloth napkins into little fans the way Lila always did, and the candles threw steady plumes of light above their glass chimneys. On the sideboard, the roast I'd nursed in a marinade for 2 days rested on a platter, rosemary tucked along the edge. A bowl of garlic mashed potatoes stood ready, whipped to glossy peaks and dotted with butter that softened and glossed the surface. The pecan pie cooled on the kitchen counter, a perfect ring of toasted halves, lacquered with that amber sheen Lila taught me to aim for. I could still hear her voice grating my crust. "Don't overwork it, Henry. Feel it. It'll tell you when to stop." I took my chair at the head of the table, out of momentum more than hunger. The first bite of roast was perfect salt, riding the edge of rosemary meat tender as a secret, but it might as well have been cardboard. My throat closed halfway through chewing. I washed the bite down with sweet tea and tried again. After a few careful attempts, I set the fork across the plate. The candles were too bright for an empty table. I blew them out and watched the smoke braid itself into the chandelier's light. I packed the roast and the potatoes into containers, the clack of the lids the only sound. I left the pie out like we always did, just in case someone stopped by late. Habit more than hope. Though I'd be lying if I said a small part of me wasn't still listening for a car door. A laugh, a hurried knock. The part of me that hadn't quite accepted how holidays change when the family map redraws itself without your permission. I carried my phone to the table as a distraction and scrolled. I wasn't expecting a message. They'd made their choice. Still, the screen offered something to look at besides the reflection of my own face in the window. And there it was, Kayla's mother's Facebook post. A long dining table trimmed in holly sparkling wine glasses, a centerpiece busy with berries. People leaned in toward one another, faces lit from below by warm bulbs, and above by their own good fortune. At the far end, my son Mark sat with his hand over Kayla's. He looked younger than he had in years. The caption read, "So grateful for a house full of family this Christmas." Grateful. The word landed like a stone at the bottom of a well. Their gratitude had a specific address, and it wasn't mine. I set the phone face down and stared past the dark window to the tree in the corner of the living room. The gold star at the top Mark made it in 3rd grade was missing one point where it had snapped off years ago. Lila always insisted on turning that broken edge toward the front. "It's perfect because it's ours," she'd say. I could almost hear her say it again, soft but sure, like she was standing in socks on the hardwood smiling at me to let the small things be small. I poured another glass of tea, sat back down, tried to talk sense into my own chest. It's one holiday, I told myself. They're juggling families. People are busy. But even as I said it, I knew better. This wasn't a mix-up or traffic on the interstate. This was a choice. The kind that starts as a single skipped visit and hardens into a habit if you don't look it in the eye. I picked up my phone again, not for the photo this time, but to look at the clock, and saw I'd been in the chair less than an hour. Grief is elastic. It can stretch a minute into a mile. I stood, turned off the tree lights, one set at a time, and walked down the hallway past the framed photos. There we were on our last Christmas with Lila, her smile steady, mine a fraction too careful. Mark already leaning toward that other orbit. I stopped at the bedroom dresser where Lila's blue cardigan still hung over the chair back, like it was waiting for her shoulders. I smoothed the sleeve and let my hand rest a second longer than made sense. When sleep wouldn't come, I went back to the living room, the recliner creaking its usual complaint. Lila's knitting basket sat where it always had, a ball of yarn softly collapsed mid-row. I hadn't moved it. Couldn't. The clock in the other room ticked like it was pulling me further from the life we'd built, and closer to something smaller, quieter, less defined. A car rolled down the street, headlights sliding along the ceiling, and for a heartbeat I lifted my head, thinking maybe no, it kept going. I shifted forward, elbows on knees, hands clasped, the habit my father used to have when he was trying to make a decision he didn't want to make. I told myself a version of the truth I could stand. They didn't forget you, Henry. They chose someone else's table. The sentence was heavy, but it fit, the kind of weight you can pick up without dropping it. Near 9, I gave up on television's noise and went to bed. The space beside me was cold. I lay there replaying years of Christmas mornings, when Mark was small, the thud of socked feet in the hallway, the cinnamon rolls Lila pulled from the oven, while powdered sugar lifted like snow. I'd read "'Twas the Night Before Christmas" by the fire mark's head growing heavier against my shoulder with every couplet. We were the destination then. After he married, we started sharing 1 year with us, 1 year with them, and then, somehow, it turned into, maybe we'll swing by if we can. I told myself that's the way life bends. But a courier on Christmas Day. That wasn't bending. That was drawing a line. Sometime in the dark, I must have drifted a little. When I opened my eyes, the house was blue with early morning and the tree lights were still on. I must have missed one switch last night, small rebellion or gentle mercy, I don't know. The living room looked like a photograph. Pretty, but still. I didn't make coffee right away. The kitchen felt like a place where answers should appear, and I didn't have any I trusted yet. I pulled on a sweater and stepped out into air that bit my cheeks. The yard wore a thin frost, the bird bath skimmed over the grass, edged in white. Lila used to start mornings out here, no matter the season, checking the little wood bird feeder that hung from the maple at the yard's edge. I'd tease her. What business do birds have with sweat in January? She'd smile without looking at me. They still need to eat Henry even when no one's watching. I followed the stone path because my feet remembered it. The feeder swayed on its hook, empty. It was shaped like a tiny house-pitched roof little ledge, Lila's choice, because she wanted the cardinals to feel welcome. I reached up to steady it and felt something wedged tight under the roofline, an edge of paper stiff with cold. An envelope. My name was on the front. Just Henry. Not Mr. Cole, not our address in the corner. Lila's handwriting round and exact. In the upper right, she'd written a date from almost 6 months earlier, just a week before the hospital called me at dawn to say you should come now. I stared at the letters until the cold needled through the sweater and into my bones. I carried it inside and sat at the kitchen table with my hands flat on either side, as if I were afraid it might slide off. The flap lifted with a whisper. Inside was a single line in her neat script. If you're reading this, something happened that I hoped wouldn't. Go to my desk, the top drawer. There's more. I stood the chair legs rasping against the floor and walked down the hall to the room we still called the study. Though mostly it had been Lila's nest pens, in a chipped mug, her reading glasses perched on crossword books, a small dish full of paper clips and rubber bands she never admitted she saved. I opened the top drawer and saw the expected stationery stamps a checkbook with 2 carbon copies left. I ran my hand along the underside of the drawer floor the way you do when you're looking for what you don't quite believe you'll find, and my fingers caught tape. Another envelope, thicker. A small brass key clipped to it with a paper clip. On the outside, one more line from Lila. If Mark ever shuts you out, this will make sense. I didn't know where the story was taking me yet. I only knew the first chapter had just ended, and the next one had already been written in a hand I trusted more than my own. The brass key sat heavy in my palm, its surface worn smooth from years of use. It wasn't the kind of thing you kept for decoration. This was a working key, cool to the touch and quiet with promise. I turned it over once, twice, then laid it on the desk beside the envelope, and unfolded the paper inside. It was a deed. A legal document printed neat in black ink, my name bold at the top. But the address, Henderson Springs, a small town I'd driven past more times than I could count on my way to the lake. 40 minutes from my house, maybe less, if the traffic lights broke my way. I couldn't recall ever stopping there, let alone owning property. Yet here it was, stamped, notarized, and entirely mine. Beneath the deed, Lila had added another note clipped at the corner with a paper clip. Henry, if Mark ever shuts you out, this place is yours. Always was. You just didn't know it. I sank into her chair, the one that still carried the faint scent of her lavender lotion, and let the words rearrange the room. Lila had seen something coming. She'd seen the slow drift of visits the way Kayla's voice carried in conversations, while Mark's grew quieter the way decisions began to happen around me instead of with me. And she had planned for it. For a moment, the grief and anger from Christmas thinned, replaced by something steadier. Lila had left me a safeguard, a reminder that my worth wasn't tethered to whether our son remembered to show up. Still, questions crowded in. Why Henderson Springs? Why keep it from me all these years? And what exactly did she mean about Mark shutting me out? I thought about calling someone, maybe Carl Jenkins, my neighbor, 2 houses down, a retired lawyer, who'd helped me review insurance papers after Lila passed. But explaining all this over the phone felt wrong. This was something I needed to see with my own eyes. I stood, went to the bedroom, and pulled out my overnight bag. One change of clothes, my thermos, a flashlight, the old Swiss Army knife I'd carried since Vietnam. I tucked the key into my pocket where I could feel its weight. Before leaving, I paused in the bedroom. Draped over the chair in the corner was Lila's favorite cardigan, the blue one with the frayed cuffs. She used to pull it on when she read in bed, glasses sliding down her nose. I smoothed the sleeve once and whispered, "You thought ahead, didn't you?" The drive out of town was quiet, the kind of quiet where every sound sharpens. I passed the frozen lake where Lila used to make me stop for winter photos, the hardware store where we'd spent half our Saturdays in retirement, and miles of bare trees reaching for the pale winter sky. Henderson Springs appeared almost suddenly, a scatter of small shops, a diner with a flickering neon sign, a gas station that looked like it hadn't been updated since the Reagan years. The address led me down a gravel road bordered by pines. Numbers nailed to mailboxes ticked down until one matched the deed. There it was, a small white house with blue shutters and a stone porch. Not flashy, not run down, just waiting. The steps creaked under my boots as I climbed them. The key slid into the lock as if it had never belonged anywhere else. When the door clicked open, I hesitated, half expecting to hear Lila's voice calling from the kitchen. Instead, there was only stillness. Inside, the air carried a faint scent of cedar and something sweet, maybe from the old wooden furniture. Everything was neat, lived in, as though someone had been keeping it ready. On the mantel sat framed photographs, our 35th anniversary. Lila at the beach, holding her sandals, even one I'd never seen before of her, sitting on this very porch, with a coffee cup in hand, smiling at someone just out of frame. The bookshelf held her old favorites, arranged in the order she liked, mysteries on top, cookbooks on the bottom. On the coffee table, a folded note waited like it had been expecting me. "This is yours, in case they ever forget who you are." I lowered myself into the armchair by the window, the note trembling slightly in my hand. She hadn't just left me property. She'd left me proof that she saw me, even when others didn't. A place to anchor myself if the world shifted too far. The kitchen cupboards held neatly stacked dishes, the pantry stocked with pasta and canned vegetables, the fridge unplugged but spotless. On the inside of one cabinet door was a grocery list in Lila's handwriting: coffee, bread, eggs, sugar. As if she'd stepped out only long enough to pick them up. Down the hallway, 2 bedrooms waited. One held a neatly made bed topped with a quilt folded just so. The other was mostly empty, save for a stack of boxes labeled Henry's Things. I didn't open them. Not yet. I sat by the window again, watching light shift through the pines. The quiet here wasn't like the hollow silence of home. This quiet was full intentional, as if the house itself was keeping me company. Laura had known. She'd seen the slow drift, the way Kayla answered more often than Mark, the way visits shortened, the way Christmas turned into an afterthought. Instead of confronting it head-on, she'd built me a safeguard, a place that said, "You matter." Don't forget it. I didn't stay long, just long enough to feel the firewood stacked neatly by the back porch, to breathe in the cedar, to let the truth settle. Then I locked the door and slid the key back into my pocket. Driving home, the sun sat low behind the bare trees, washing the road in gold. I still didn't know why Lila had chosen Henderson Springs, or why she'd kept it hidden. But I knew one thing: whatever storm was gathering, I wasn't as alone as I'd thought. The next morning, I woke up restless, the image of that white house still pressing at the back of my mind. I hadn't unpacked my overnight bag when I got home, hadn't even put the key back in the drawer. It sat on the nightstand, catching the pale morning light like a coin flipped and frozen mid-air. I held it for a long moment, weighing what it meant, not just the house, but Lila's quiet foresight. Coffee in hand. I stared out the kitchen window as frost melted from the edges of the lawn. My eyes drifted to Carl Jenkins' house, my neighbor of 30 years, retired lawyer, and the kind of man who still wore pressed shirts just to read the newspaper. If anyone could make sense of a deed I never knew existed, it was him. I didn't go right away. Something told me I needed another look before sharing it. So by mid-morning I was back on the road to Henderson Springs, or Maple Ridge as the deed called it, though locals probably just said, the Ridge. The drive felt shorter this time, like the house was already tugging me closer. The gravel road crunched under my tires, and when I pulled into the driveway, the place seemed to greet me. The shutters caught the winter sun. The porch steps sagged just enough to show they'd carried weight before. Unlocking the door a second time didn't feel like trespass. It felt like entry. Inside, I took my time. The living room carried a warmth, even without heat, the faint smell of cedar clinging to the old beams. On the mantel, the photographs still waited. I lingered on the one I'd never seen, Lila, on the porch mug in hand, eyes crinkled with a smile. Who had taken it? Why hadn't she shown it to me? Questions piled up, but I let them rest. I opened cupboards, checked drawers, walked down the hall slowly. In the bedroom with the quilt, I sat on the edge of the bed, ran my hand over the stitching. It was hers, no doubt. Each square cut from scraps of old dresses, shirts, curtains. Lila never wasted fabric. Every piece carried memory. The other bedroom was nearly empty, but the boxes labeled Henry's Things pulled at me. I slid one open. Inside were photo albums, old ones I thought had been lost. Summers at the lake, Lila holding Mark as a baby me in uniform, grinning like I hadn't seen the world's sharp edges yet. Beneath the albums were cookbooks Lila had sworn by pages marked with her neat notes. At the bottom lay a small lockbox, cool and stubborn under my hand. No key in sight. I left it for later, closing the box and stacking the albums carefully. Back in the kitchen, I brewed coffee using the old drip machine perched on the counter. It hissed and sputtered like it hadn't been used in years, but it worked. Sitting at the table, I noticed the grocery list taped inside the cabinet door again. Coffee, bread, eggs, sugar. It wasn't just a list. It was Lila's handwriting, her rhythm. She'd known I'd stand right here one day reading it like scripture. I drank the coffee slowly, letting the bitterness settle me. The quiet of Maple Ridge wasn't the hollow silence of my house back in town. Here the stillness felt deliberate, like the air itself wanted to remind me I wasn't forgotten. By early afternoon, I locked up again. The key slid smooth, the door closed with the kind of click that promised privacy. I carried the memory of the place back with me, the quilt, the photos, the untouched lockbox. Back home, I sat at the dining room table, the same one I'd set for Christmas, and laid out the deed, the key, and Lila's notes. I stared at them until the light outside turned gold, and finally admitted to myself Lila had seen this day coming. She'd known I might be standing alone at Christmas. She'd known our son's loyalty might bend under Kayla's hand. She'd known I would need a refuge. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing the photograph of Lila on the porch, her smile aimed at someone just out of frame. Whoever it was, I felt sure it had been taken here long before I ever knew the house existed. Why had she kept it from me? To protect me, maybe. Or to keep the peace until she couldn't anymore. The next morning, I finally walked across the yard to Carl's house. He answered in his flannel shirt toast still in hand. "Henry," he said, eyebrows rising, "you're up early. Everything all right?" "Not exactly," I said. "Got a minute?" We sat at his kitchen table, morning paper folded neatly between us. I slid the deed across to him. He adjusted his glasses, reading in silence for a long moment. Then his eyes sharpened. "Maple Ridge," he murmured. "Nice little place out that way." "And this?" He tapped the paper. "This is no accident. Your wife set this up in your name alone. No co-owner, no joint title. Just you." I shook my head. "Never even heard of it until yesterday." Carl leaned back, folding his hands. "That's the point. If it's only in your name, then no one else has a claim. Not Mark, not Kayla, not even by marriage." Lila wanted to make sure of that. I felt the weight of his words settle heavy and certain. Lila had given me more than a house. She'd given me a line in the sand. Carl's gaze softened. "Why do you think she did it, Henry?" I hesitated, but the truth pressed forward. Because she knew what I didn't want to see, that Mark and Kayla might one day try to take control. Carl nodded slowly. I've seen it before. Kids, in-laws, cousins. Sometimes it's well-meaning, sometimes it's not. Either way, this... He tapped the deed again. This is protection. I leaned back in my chair, the brass key warm in my pocket. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I felt steady. Not safe, not yet, but steady. Carl didn't rush me that morning. He set his toast down, poured us both a cup of coffee, and waited. He'd been my neighbor for 3 decades, long enough to know I wasn't a man who liked to be pressed. Finally, I told him the whole story about the envelope in the bird feeder, the key, the house in Maple Ridge, and Lila's letter. Carl leaned back his chair, creaking eyes sharp behind his reading glasses. Henry, he said slowly, your wife was smarter than most lawyers I've ever known. She didn't just tuck away a deed. She set up a fallback. Something no one else could touch. His words carried more weight than I was ready to hold. But why not tell me, I asked. He stirred his coffee, thoughtful. Because if she told you, you might have pushed back. Maybe tried to share it with Mark or Kayla in the spirit of family. Lila knew better. She saw something coming you didn't want to admit. I bristled, but deep down I knew he was right. For years I'd told myself Mark was just busy, that marriage and work explained the distance. But Kayla had a way of stepping in front of conversations, speaking for him, shaping his decisions. Lila saw that long before I did. Carl reached for the deed again, tapping the edge with one finger. This was deliberate. When people separate property like this, it's usually for one of 3 reasons: taxes, creditors, or family disputes. My guess Lila wasn't worried about the IRS or a loan shark. Family, I said quietly. He nodded. Family. The word stung, though it wasn't new. On Christmas Day, I'd felt it like a slap, the note delivered by courier, the Facebook post showing my son smiling at another table while mine sat empty. But hearing Carl lay it out in plain terms stripped away the last of my excuses. Carl leaned forward. You need to check the rest of Lila's papers. If she set up a house without telling you, there's a good chance she put other safeguards in place. Accounts, trusts, maybe even legal instructions. I thought about her desk, the drawers I hadn't fully opened, the stacks of crossword books and half-used stationery. She'd always been orderly, tucking things where she could reach them. You think she left more? I asked. I'd bet on it, he said. And if she did, you want to know sooner rather than later. If Mark and Kayla are circling, they won't wait forever to make their move. I rubbed a hand over my face, feeling the rough stubble of neglect. Circling, I repeated. That was the right word. Christmas hadn't been an oversight. It was the beginning of something deliberate. Carl set his coffee cup down firmly. Henry, I've seen this play before. A grieving spouse adult, children who think they know better, maybe a daughter-in-law with strong opinions. It starts with offers of help. Then come suggestions about finances, paperwork, downsizing. Before you know it, you're a guest in your own life. The thought made my stomach knot. I pictured Mark standing in my living room saying he wanted to help manage my accounts. I thought of Kayla's handwriting on that Christmas note, brisk and neat, as if shutting me out were just another task on her list. I sat in silence for a long while, the only sound the faint hum of Carl's old refrigerator. Finally, I said, I don't want to believe my own son would do that. Carl's eyes softened. Belief isn't the issue. Preparation is. Lila prepared. You owe it to her and yourself to follow through. I left his house with more questions than answers. The brass key in my pocket suddenly felt heavier, like it carried not just a lock, but a warning. At home, I went straight to Lila's study. For months, I'd avoided it, leaving her reading glasses, her crossword puzzles, her ceramic dish of paper clips untouched. Now, I pulled open each drawer, searching deeper than before. At first, it looked ordinary: stationery pens, a stack of birthday cards. But in the bottom drawer beneath a pile of old magazines, I found a folder labeled in Lila's looping handwriting household private. My chest tightened as I pulled it out. Inside were tax returns insurance forms and a handwritten list titled Accounts Henry. Some had been open for decades, but a few were recent. My eyes caught on one entry in particular, Pierce & Associates Trust 7184. Beside it in parentheses, she'd written, "Ask Walt if needed." I carried the folder back to the kitchen table and stared at it until the shadows outside stretched long. Lila had left a map, and Carl had been right. She wanted me to find it when the time came. That night I called Carl again. When I read him the entry, he let out a low whistle. Pierce & Associates. That's Gerald Pierce. Old-school accountant. Handled a lot of estate work back in the day. If there's a trust in your name, Henry, it changes everything. Everything, everything. It means you've got assets under your sole control, no co-trustees, no successors but you, and if it's structured right, not even Mark or Kayla could touch it. I held the phone tighter. You think Lila set it up that way? Carl's voice softened. Henry, from what you've told me, she saw this storm brewing. My guess, she made sure you'd have shelter. I sat in the dark kitchen long after the call ended, the folder open in front of me, Lila's handwriting steady and sure across the page. She had prepared for this moment, the moment I'd finally stop pretending and start defending. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lila's handwriting, those loops and careful letters spelling out household private. It was as if she were still here, nudging me along, pointing me to things I hadn't wanted to face. By dawn, I'd made up my mind. If she'd left a note about Pierce & Associates, then that's where I was going. Carl agreed to come with me. Gerald Pierce has been around forever, he said, as we pulled into the parking lot of a small brick office above a bakery. Sharp as they come. Trust me, Henry, if anyone can explain what Lila set up, it's him. The smell of fresh bread drifted up the stairwell as we climbed. Inside the waiting room was small, tidy, just 2 chairs and a wall of filing cabinets. A receptionist smiled politely and told us Gerald would be out in a moment. When the man himself appeared, he was lean, gray-haired, and alert, with eyes that looked like they'd missed nothing in 50 years of balancing books. Mr. Cole, he said, shaking my hand firmly. And you must be Walt Harris. I remember your firm. His handshake was warm, confident, the kind of grip that makes you feel both steady and exposed. We sat at a round table in his office. Bookshelves lined the walls, binders labeled neatly by year. He slid on a pair of wire-rim glasses as I handed him Lila's folder. He flipped through the pages, stopping at the line about Trust 7184. A small smile tugged at his mouth. Yes, he said softly. I remember this. Your wife was very thorough. What exactly did she do? I asked. He leaned back, fingers steepled. About 5 years ago, Lila came to me alone. She said she wanted to establish a private trust in your name only. No co-trustees. No successor but you. At the time, I asked her if you knew. She said no, and she wanted it that way. I felt my throat tighten. Why would she keep something like that from me? She said she didn't want you to feel burdened, that it was just a safety net, a just-in-case measure, her words. Carl gave me a knowing look. Sounds like her. Gerald adjusted his glasses again and continued. This trust is airtight. Everything in it is yours to control and only yours. The assets are shielded. If anyone tries to argue you're not capable, they'd have to prove incompetence to a degree that simply won't stand if you have evidence otherwise. Your wife was clear she wanted you protected from interference, particularly family interference. The words hung in the air, heavier than I wanted them to be. I asked the question carefully. How much is in it? Gerald named a figure that left me stunned. Not millions, but far more than I expected, enough to keep me secure for the rest of my life. Enough that anyone looking at my accounts would know there was something worth fighting over. I leaned back in my chair, trying to breathe evenly. So, all this time, she had this in place. Yes, Gerald said gently, and she left instructions. If circumstances shifted, her phrase, not mine, I was to explain everything to you and ensure you could access it without delay. I thought of Christmas Day, of the courier's envelope, of Mark standing in my living room offering to help manage my affairs. Circumstances had shifted, all right. Carl put a hand on my shoulder. Henry, this is the best news you could have hoped for. You're not cornered. You've got options. I nodded slowly, though my chest felt heavy. She knew I whispered. She knew they'd try something. Gerald gave me a patient look. Your wife was a wise woman. She told me she'd rather prepare quietly than argue loudly. Said you'd understand when the time came. I folded the papers carefully back into the folder, my hands trembling just a little. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I felt something other than dread. Lila had left me a map. Not just the cabin, not just a few notes tucked away in bird feeders and desk drawers, an entire structure built to keep me safe. When we left the office, the bakery downstairs was just pulling cinnamon rolls from the oven. The smell wrapped around me, warm and sweet. I bought 2, handed one to Carl, and we ate standing on the sidewalk in the cold winter air. She thought of everything I said quietly. Carl chewed thoughtfully. She thought of you, Henry. That's what this all comes down to. But later that evening, as I sat in my recliner with the folder on my lap, the sweetness of the cinnamon roll had long faded. A new thought pressed in on me. If Lila had gone to such lengths to protect me, it meant she truly believed I'd need protection. From my own son. That realization stung worse than anything else. 3 mornings later, I was pouring coffee when I heard tires crunching in my driveway. Not the mail truck, not Carl's pickup, too new, too polished. Through the kitchen window, I saw a silver SUV ease to a stop. My stomach tightened before I even recognized it as Mark's. I set the pot down and wiped my hands, taking my time, though my pulse was anything but steady. By the time I reached the front door, he was already knocking 3 quick taps like he was rehearsing courtesy. When I opened it, he gave me a smile that didn't touch his eyes. Hey, Dad. Behind him, Kayla sat in the passenger seat, head bent over her phone. She didn't look up once. What brings you here? I asked, keeping my voice even. Thought I'd stop by. We haven't talked since Christmas. I leaned against the doorframe. We could have talked then if you'd been here. For a moment, he faltered. Yeah, about that. Melissa's mom. Well, it just made sense this year. I held up a hand. No need to explain. I read the note. He cleared his throat. Right. Well, I also wanted to check in, see how you're doing, and maybe talk about some things. Things... He shifted, glanced back at the SUV. You know, Mom's stuff. The accounts. I was in the garage the other day looking for that old fishing rod, and I saw some boxes with paperwork. Figured maybe you could use a hand sorting through it all. There it was, the real reason. I let the silence stretch until it grew heavy. What made you think I needed help with that? He licked his lips. You've got a lot on your plate. And Kayla and I have been talking about maybe helping you manage things just to make sure it's all in order. For who? His eyes flickered, then he tried for a smile again. For you. For everyone, really. I stepped back, gesturing him inside. Let's sit. He followed me into the living room. I settled into my recliner. He took the couch, sitting on the edge like a man ready to spring. So I said, tell me more about this help you're offering. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. We just think it might be good to consolidate things. Streamline. Maybe move some accounts around. We've been reading about how vulnerable older folks can be to scams. Older folks, I repeated, my voice calm but sharp. He winced. I didn't mean I think you did. He looked down at his hands. For a long moment, the only sound was the clock ticking in the corner. Finally, I asked, "Tell me something, Mark. Did you know Kayla forged my name on a check 2 years ago?" His head jerked up, color draining from his face. "What, don't lie." $15,000. Went to a contractor in Tennessee, one of her rental projects. I didn't press charges then, but don't insult me by pretending you didn't know. His jaw-clenched eyes darting toward the window where Kayla's SUV idled. He didn't deny it. That silence was answer enough. "You weren't checking in on me," I said quietly. "You were checking on what I have." "Dad, it's not like that. For you, maybe it isn't. But from where I'm sitting, it looks a lot like you're trying to take over before you're invited." He ran a hand over his face, weary but defiant. "We just don't want things to get messy down the line." Messy for who? He didn't answer. Out the window, Kayla was still on her phone, not once glancing toward the house. "She's not coming in?" I asked. He shook his head. "She thought it'd be better if I talked to you alone. Probably worried you'll say too much." His frown deepened. "You're overthinking this." "No," I said, leaning forward. "I'm finally thinking clearly. That hung between us like smoke. I don't need help managing anything," I said after a long pause. "Your mother made sure of that." His gaze sharpened. "What does that mean?" "It means I've got everything I need, and I intend to keep it that way." For a second, I thought he'd push, but then his shoulders slumped. "We just want to make sure you're okay." "I am," I told him. And for the first time in a long while, it felt true. He stood smoothing his jacket. "All right, I'll see you soon then." I walked him to the door. "Tell Kayla I said hello." He nodded, climbed back into the SUV. She leaned over, said something sharp, and the car pulled away without either of them glancing back. I stood there a while, watching the taillights vanish down the street. When I closed the door, the house was quiet again, but not like Christmas night. This quiet was steadier. I walked to the study, opened the drawer, and looked at the cabin key resting inside. Just seeing it steadied me. Mark and Kayla had shown their hand. And now I knew exactly how far I was willing to go to keep what Lila had given me. It was the first Thursday in January when I noticed it. A black sedan parked across from my mailbox, not moving, not leaving, just idling. At first I thought maybe a delivery mix-up, someone waiting on directions. But 10 minutes passed. Then 15. The driver never stepped out. I carried my coffee out to the porch, pretending not to look directly at it. The man inside wore a dark coat head bent like he was reading something, but the tint of the glass was just enough to keep me from seeing clearly. The longer it sat there, the heavier the air felt. Finally, the engine hummed, and the car eased down the street without so much as a glance in my direction. But I didn't like it. Not one bit. By noon, I had my jacket on and was walking the half-block to Walt's hardware store. If anyone in this town knew who'd been snooping around, it would be him. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside. Henry Walt said from behind the counter, eyebrows raised. "Didn't expect to see you today." "Yeah, well," I said, leaning in. "Saw something this morning I didn't like. Figured you might know if anyone's been asking about me." His expression tightened. What kind of something? A black sedan? Sat out front for a while. Guy inside didn't knock, didn't move. Just waited. Walt frowned. Not a plate I recognize. "But you know who was in here a couple days ago, Mark? Asking about trailers. Said you'd be downsizing soon." Downsizing. The word hit me like a shove. That wasn't help that was clearing someone out. Did you tell him anything I asked? Walt shook his head firmly. Told him if you needed me, you'd call yourself. Good, I said, though my jaw was tight. I remembered then, tucked away in Lila's folder, the name I hadn't yet acted on. Beside it, her handwriting in case of trouble. Dana Morgan. I took a breath. You remember that name? Lila left Dana Morgan? Walt nodded slowly. Yeah. You thinking about calling her? I think I need to know why Lila wrote those words next to her name. He pulled out an old Rolodex from under the counter, thumbed through, and slid a card across to me. She's in town, runs a consulting outfit, estate planning, dispute resolution, that kind of thing. Not cheap, but she's the kind of person who sizes up a room in a heartbeat, knows what people are worth before they even open their mouths. I pocketed the card. Appreciate it. Before I left, he added, Henry, if Mark's making moves, he's not doing it alone. Watch your back. I intend to. That afternoon, I dialed the number. A woman's voice answered, clipped all business. Morgan Consulting. Is this Dana Morgan speaking? My name is Henry Cole. You don't know me, but you knew my wife, Lila. There was a pause. Ah, Henry. Yes, I knew Lila. She was very clear about the kind of man you are. I wasn't sure if that was good or bad. She had your name in her papers. Said, in case of trouble. Well, I think trouble's knocking. We agreed to meet the next morning at a cafe on Main Street. When I walked in, Dana was already there, a leather notebook open beside her teacup. Mid-50s, sharp eyes, posture straight as an arrow, the kind of person who didn't waste words or gestures. She stood to shake my hand. Henry, she said, steady grip, no nonsense. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. We sat, and she wasted no time. You said, trouble's knocking. Tell me about it. So I did. Christmas. The note from Kayla, the forged check, the black sedan, Mark's sudden interest in helping with the accounts. She listened, jotting now and then, her face unreadable. When I finished, she closed her notebook softly. Your son and daughter-in-law are positioning themselves. First, socially making comments that suggest you're struggling. Then, financially looking for ways to access your accounts and property. Next, they'll try legally. I frowned. Legally guardianship petitions. Power of attorney grabs. People underestimate how easy it can be if you look isolated. I'm not isolated. No, but they're building a picture where you are, and unless we get ahead of it, the court will take their version as truth. I leaned in. Lila trusted you, so I'll ask you straight. What would you do? Protect the perimeter, she said. Lock down your assets. Build a paper trail proving you're competent. Get witnesses who can vouch for you. And let them think they're winning until you're ready to show them they're not. When we left the cafe, she handed me her card. Henry. I work for clients, not families. Which means I'll do what needs to be done even if it ruffles feathers. That's exactly what I'm looking for. On the walk back to my truck, I caught sight of another black sedan parked down the street. Different plate, different model, but close enough that my skin prickled. I didn't mention it to Dana. Not yet. Back home, I changed the locks, moved Lila's files into a lockbox in the attic, and called the bank to set alerts on all my accounts. By evening, I was still sorting papers when I found a sealed envelope tucked into the back of her folder. Her handwriting. My name. I opened it carefully. If you're reading this, it means you've seen what I saw coming. Trust Dana, and don't be afraid to let them think they're winning until you're ready to show them they're not. I sat for a long time by the fire, that note in my hands. Outside down the street, I heard the faint hum of an engine idling before it faded into the night. Trouble wasn't just knocking anymore, it was circling. But I had just found my first real ally. The knock came sharp and official, not the neighborly tap of someone dropping off a pie. When I opened the door, a man in a beige windbreaker stood there, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Cole?" he asked. "Yes. I'm here to deliver a notice from the county court. You'll want to read it carefully." He handed me a thick envelope and turned on his heel without waiting for a signature. I shut the door, a strange heaviness in my chest, and walked to the kitchen table. The envelope was heavier than it looked. When I broke the seal, the words hit me like cold water. Petition for guardianship. Filed by Mark Cole and Kayla Cole. I read the lines twice, then a third time. They claimed I was no longer capable of managing my personal or financial affairs. They cited declining cognitive function. They listed so-called examples, unpaid utility bills, confusion over banking passwords, even an incident where I supposedly left the stove on. Half of it was lies. The other half were half-truths stretched until they snapped. Yes, once I misplaced a gas bill under a newspaper. Yes, I'd forgotten a password, but who hasn't? And as for leaving the stove on, I'd turned it down to simmer, not forgotten it. But on paper, twisted into neat bullet points, it painted a picture of incompetence. My phone was already in my hand. I dialed Dana. She picked up on the second ring. "Henry, they've moved," I said, my voice low. "A guardianship petition. It's here." She was silent for a beat. Then, faster than I expected. "Guardianships are dangerous, Henry. They're easier to get than most people think, especially if the court believes you're isolated. I'm not isolated." "No, but they're making you look that way. We need to build our own picture, starting now." By noon, I was sitting across from her desk. The petition was spread out in front of us, its legal jargon both heavy and impersonal. "They've even listed the cabin," I muttered, tapping the last page, "claiming it's at risk of neglect if left under my control." Dana made a small note in her book. "This isn't just about guardianship, Henry. They're going for your assets. That cabin is leverage. They want to unlock it, probably as collateral for something else." I clenched my fists. "Not while I'm breathing." She stood crossed to her filing cabinet and pulled out a folder. "This is what we do. We create a paper trail. First, medical clearance proving you're competent. Second, documented records of you managing your accounts. Third, witnesses, neighbors, shop owners, anyone who's seen you handle your affairs. Every scrap counts. If we give the court a stack of evidence thicker than theirs, we win before the hearing even begins." "And if we don't?" I asked quietly. She met my gaze. "Then you lose control of everything." That sentence hung in the room like smoke, but she wasn't finished. "We'll start today. Let's go." The first stop was the bank. Mrs. Alvarez, the manager, had known Lila and me for decades. When she saw us walk in, her face brightened. "Henry," she said warmly, "what can I do for you? I need records," I told her. "Last 6 months of statements, and anything showing I've been handling my own transactions." She glanced at Dana, then back at me, concern flickering in her eyes. "Is there trouble?" "Family trouble," I said simply. Her jaw tightened. "You've been in here every month making deposits yourself. I can print the record showing that." "It'll help." From the bank, we drove to Dr. Keller's office, my doctor and Lila's once upon a time. He gave me a full exam, reflexes, memory questions, even had me write a sentence on a notepad. When he was finished, he leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "Henry, you're as sharp as I've ever seen you. I'll draft a letter certifying you have full cognitive capacity. They won't get far with this nonsense." "That's exactly what I need, Doc," I said. Back in the car, Dana was already on the phone arranging sworn witness statements. "Now we need neighbors, shopkeepers, people who can say they've interacted with you recently in a business-like setting." "There's Ellen at the hardware store," I said, thinking it through. "And Raj at the grocery." "I've been handling everything myself since Lila passed." "Perfect," Dana said. "The more varied, the harder it'll be for them to claim bias." We went straight to the grocery store. Raj came out from behind the counter, wiping his hands on his apron. "Henry, How's the house holding up? Well enough, I said. But I've got a favor to ask. When I explained, his eyes hardened. They're trying to take control of your life. That's not right. I'll write whatever you need. You're here every week with a list comparing prices, catching mistakes. You're sharper than half the folks half your age. By the end of the day, we had 6 months of bank statements, a doctor's letter, and 3 sworn witness statements. Dana stacked the papers neatly, her eyes sharp with satisfaction. This is a start, she said. Now we file our response. The hearing's in 2 weeks, but they'll get a copy in 5 days. That's when they'll realize you're not rolling over. That night, I sat by the fire, staring at the flames. Laura's, no, Lila's letter still rested upstairs in the lockbox. Don't be afraid to let them think they're winning. Maybe Mark and Kayla thought the petition was their master stroke. Maybe they believed they had me cornered. But master strokes work both ways. Because while they were busy building their picture of me, I was already painting one of my own. And when the time came, I'd make sure the court saw mine clearer. The next morning, I woke with a plan. The guardianship petition had lit a fire under me. If Mark and Kayla thought they could rewrite my life with half-truths and legal ink, they were in for a surprise. Dana had called it a paper wall. Brick by brick, document by document, we'd build a fortress around me so thick even their lawyer wouldn't see a crack. We started early. Dana met me at the kitchen table, her leather notebook, open papers spread between us. Here's the blueprint, she said. Bank records, medical certification, community witnesses, that's the foundation. But we need more, a clean timeline of your activities, proof of transactions you've handled, and the cabin deed tied down airtight. The cabin, I muttered. The very heart of it. They wanted that place more than anything. Exactly, Dana said. We make it untouchable, and the rest falls apart. She wasn't wrong. Our first stop was Ellen's hardware store. She'd known me and Lila since the kids were in grade school. When Dana explained the situation, Ellen's eyes narrowed. So they're trying to say you can't handle yourself? She asked, incredulous. Henry, you're in here every month buying supplies, measuring boards, comparing nails like you're building the White House. If that's confusion, I wish half my customers had it. She grabbed a pad of paper and scribbled her statement right then and there, her pen pressing hard into the page. Use this, she said, thrusting it at Dana. If they try to paint him as incompetent, I'll stand in front of the judge myself. Next was the Veterans Center. I'd been a fixture there since my Army days, helping organize breakfasts and fundraisers. When I asked the director, Tom, if he'd testify, he smiled grimly. You've been keeping our books for years, Henry. You balance numbers better than any of us. I'll vouch for you. By lunchtime, we had a growing stack of statements. Dana kept them organized, each one notarized where possible. But the biggest brick of all came that afternoon. We sat in Gerald Pierce's modest office above the bakery, the smell of fresh bread seeping up the stairs. He adjusted his wire-rim glasses, scanned the deed, and nodded. This cabin is already in Henry's trust, he said. But given what's brewing, we'll reinforce it. I'll draft an amendment moving the deed directly into the trust's protective clause. That way it ceases being an individual asset, it belongs to the trust entity. Even if guardianship were somehow granted, they wouldn't be able to touch it without a separate uphill court battle. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. So even if the worst happens, they'll be chasing shadows, Gerald finished. Dana leaned back, satisfied. That's our keystone. They can't win if they can't reach the prize. Walking out of the office, the winter air cut sharp against my face, but inside I felt steadier than I had in weeks. The trust, the statements, the doctor's certification, it was all coming together. That evening at home, I took Dana's advice further. I pulled out a yellow legal pad and began recording every interaction I'd had in the past month. Grocery trips, conversations at the veterans' breakfast visits to the hardware store. I listed dates, times, even small things like the chat with the mailman about the snowstorm, Ordinary interactions prove consistency, Dana had said. They show you're engaged, aware, present. So I wrote them all down. Each one felt like laying another brick. A few days later, Ellen called. "Henry, you'll want to know this," she said. "Kayla was in here today with a clipboard. She was asking people if you'd seemed forgetful lately. Fishing for dirt." I chuckled, though my chest tightened. "And what did you tell her that you're sharper than most of the young bucks who wander in here? Let her fish, she's in the wrong pond." I thanked her, my resolve hardening. They weren't just maneuvering in court. They were trying to poison the well of public opinion. But that too could backfire. Because every person Kayla whispered to was someone who had seen me clearly competent, steady, capable. Late that night, I sat by the fire, Dana's neatly stacked files on the table beside me. I glanced upstairs where Lila's last letter lay hidden. Her words came back to me. "Don't be afraid to let them think they're winning. Maybe they thought their whispers and petitions were pushing me into a corner." But the truth was, every move they made only showed me where to place the next brick. And with Dana's help, I wasn't just defending. I was building. By the time the hearing came, our wall wouldn't just be strong. It would be unbreakable. It was the Thursday before the hearing when the first trap appeared. Mark showed up at my door again, this time dressed sharper than usual, his jacket-pressed hair slicked down like he was trying to play a role. He carried an envelope, but didn't offer it yet. "Dad," he said, his voice rehearsed, "Kayla and I are hosting a get-together at our place Monday night. Just a few friends, some neighbors. Thought you might like to come." I studied him, hands in my pockets. "Monday. Yeah, a chance to clear the air. Show everyone we're on the same page before the hearing." That was the giveaway. This wasn't hospitality, it was optics. If I went and they steered the conversation, they could twist anything I said. If I didn't show, they'd say I was isolating myself. I nodded slowly. "I'll think about it." He smiled, but it didn't touch his eyes. "Good. Hope to see you there." Then he turned and left, slipping the envelope into his pocket without ever handing it over. That night, I called Dana. "Don't go," she said flatly. "Any friendly gathering the night before a hearing isn't friendly. It's theater. They want you to walk into a stage they control. Don't give them that." "So if I don't go, they'll spin it as me shutting people out," I said. "Then make sure you're seen somewhere else. Somewhere public. Somewhere credible. That way you set your own stage." The next morning I drove to the Veterans Center. A delivery of winter coats had just come in for the community drive, and I made sure I was there hauling boxes, organizing sizes, greeting donors. People saw me sharp, steady, useful. And they remembered it. That was the point. By Monday evening, when Mark's driveway was crowded with cars, I was across town sharing burnt coffee and jokes with a half-dozen vets while we sorted clothes. Not only was I absent from their gathering, I was visible in exactly the right place. The next day, Carl caught me outside the post office. "Henry," he said, lowering his voice, "you missed quite the show. Kayla was telling folks at that party you've been slipping, forgetting bills, losing track of things." David didn't say much, just let her talk. Didn't stop her either. I clenched my jaw, but kept my voice calm. "Thanks for telling me." At home that night, I laid out the folder Dana and I had built. Receipts, notarized bills of sale, witness statements, medical certification, it was all there. But I slipped one more thing into my jacket pocket, a small note I'd written myself on lined paper. 4 words Lila would be proud. It wasn't for the court, it was for me. Because I knew what tomorrow was the hearing. The real stage. And this time I wasn't stepping onto theirs. I was bringing my own. The courthouse smelled of paper polish and burnt coffee. Sunlight slanted through tall windows, striping the wooden benches. I sat at the respondent's table beside Dana. My hands folded, my breath steady. Across the aisle, Mark and Kayla whispered to their attorney, a slick-haired man in a navy suit who looked like he belonged in a commercial for retirement planning. Kayla's nails tapped against the bench, sharp little clicks of impatience. Mark adjusted his tie again and again, eyes darting to me, then away. The bailiff called the room to order, and the judge, a woman in her 60s with steady eyes and no tolerance for games, took her seat. "Let's proceed," she said. Their attorney went first. His voice was smooth, every word carefully measured. "Your Honor, my clients are deeply concerned for the well-being of Mr. Henry Whitaker. They have observed patterns of declining judgment, selling valuable assets, impulsively making large donations without consulting family, forgetting bills, leaving appliances on. They fear for his safety and his estate. They respectfully request guardianship to preserve both." He sat with the confidence of a man who thought he'd already won. Kayla gave him a proud pat on the arm. Mark kept staring straight ahead, jaw tight. Then Dana rose. Calm, deliberate, she gathered her papers. "Your Honor," she began, "my client has been the target of a calculated attempt to strip him of autonomy. The supposed patterns cited are not evidence of incapacity. They are the ordinary decisions of a responsible adult. We will show that the real motive here is control, particularly control of a lakeside cabin that has been part of the Whitaker family for decades." The judge nodded once. "Proceed." Dana laid the first brick receipts. She handed up the notarized bill of sale for my old pickup, complete with the buyer's statement that we'd arranged the deal weeks in advance. Hardly an impulsive decision, Dana said. Next came the donation to the Veterans Fund, backed by correspondence, showing it had been planned as part of the annual community drive. "Not recklessness," she said evenly. "Tradition." Mark shifted uncomfortably. Kayla's lips pressed thin. Then came the witnesses. Ellen from the hardware store testified that I'd been in just weeks ago, comparing lumber double-checking measurements sharp as ever. Mark from the Veterans Breakfast described me organizing coat donations, teasing him about his handwriting on the sign-in sheet. "If he's confused," Mark said dryly, "he's better at hiding it than anyone I know." Every testimony was another stone in the wall Dana had promised we'd build. Their attorney tried to push back. "Mr. Whitaker," he asked me on cross-examination, "isn't it true you recently misplaced important documents and had to call your son for help?" I met his gaze evenly. "I misplaced a utility bill. Found it 10 minutes later under the newspaper. If that's grounds for guardianship, half the state should be under supervision." A ripple of quiet laughter passed through the room. Even the judge's mouth twitched. But the turning point came when Carl took the stand. "Mr. Thompson, Dana said you mentioned you overheard a conversation at the storage facility. Could you share that with the court?" Carl adjusted his flannel collar and nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I heard Kayla telling Mark that once they had the papers signed, they could list the cabin and split the money before spring. She said, and I quote, 'He'll thank us later when he's somewhere safe.'" The room went still. Kayla's head snapped toward Mark. His face flushed crimson. Their attorney jumped up. "Objection overruled," the judge said firmly. "Mr. Thompson, you're certain of what you heard?" "Clear as day," Carl said. Didn't sound like concern to me. Sounded like a plan. From there, the tide was ours. Dana presented the trust documents Gerald had drawn up, showing the cabin was legally protected beyond their reach. She highlighted the suspicious timing, their concern surfacing only after they learned the cabin was not in the estate. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it plain. "I'm 72 years old. I've worked, paid my bills, and raised a family. I am not perfect, but I am capable of making my own choices. That cabin was built as a place for family, not a bargaining chip. If my son and daughter-in-law can't accept that, that's their choice. But they don't get to take mine." Silence hung for a long beat before the judge spoke. "Mr. Whitaker, based on the evidence and testimony, I find no grounds to grant the petition for guardianship." Furthermore, I issue a protective order preventing the plaintiffs from interfering with your property or financial decisions." Her gavel struck wood. The sound rang through me like a lock sliding shut. Mark sagged in his chair. Kayla leaned in, whispering sharp and fast, but he didn't look at her. Their lawyer was already gathering his papers, moving on. Dana turned to me, her smile small but certain. "It's over." Walking out into the cold January air, Carl clapped me on the shoulder. "You held your ground, Henry. Your Lila would be proud." I nodded, throat too tight for words. That night back home, I sat with a mug of tea at the kitchen table. No celebration, no champagne. Just quiet. But it wasn't the heavy quiet of fear. It was the stillness of something settled, the knowledge that I hadn't been erased. My life was still mine. And that was enough. The morning after the hearing, I woke before sunrise the way I always had. But the air felt different. No dread humming under my ribs, no waiting for the next shoe to drop. Just the steady tick of the clock and the furnace sighing to life. I brewed coffee the way Lila used to, a heaping spoon of grounds, a pinch of cinnamon, slow hot water. The smell filled the kitchen like it was wrapping me up. I carried the mug to the back porch, the cold biting my cheeks, and watched the first light touch the lake. For months I'd seen that lake through a veil of fear. Now it looked like freedom. Around 9, the phone rang. I recognized Mark's number. I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, I listened. His voice was clipped, careful. "Dad, we need to talk. Kayla and we made mistakes. Call me." I set the phone down without deleting the message. Not yet. For too long I'd been reacting to their moves. Now I was moving on my terms. Later that morning, I drove out to the cabin. Snow crunched under my tires. Trees bowed under white. The place stood waiting, patient, as always. I unlocked the door, and the hinges creaked like a greeting. Inside, the air was cold, but the sight warmed me. The quilt Lila had sewn lay folded over the couch. A photo of us from years back smiled from the mantel. I built a fire, the flames catching, quickly snapping and throwing warmth into the room. As I sat, I felt the weight of the last few months finally ease. By noon, Carl arrived with a thermos of chili and 2 beers. "Figured you'd be here," he said, stomping snow off his boots. "Thought we might christen your freedom." We ate at the table, steam curling from the bowls. He talked about roof repairs at the Veterans Center, gossip from the hardware store, and the rumor Ellen might finally retire. Nothing dramatic, just ordinary talk. And that was what felt so good. When he left, I walked down to the dock. The lake was half frozen, the ice catching the pale sun. I thought about all the winters Lila and I had skated there until our toes went numb, then thawed out by the fire. She'd always said this place had a heartbeat. And standing there, I believed her. A week later, I sat in Dana's office. She slid the trust papers across to me. "It's airtight, Henry. No one touches the cabin without your say." I nodded. "Good. But I want more than protection. I want it to last. After I'm gone, I want this cabin to become a retreat for veterans and their families. Not for sale, not for profit. Just a place where people can feel whole again." She studied me, then smiled slowly. "That can be done," so we did it. That spring, I hosted the first retreat. 10 veterans, some with spouses, a couple with kids. We cooked over the fire pit, swapped stories, fixed the old snowmobile. One night, a young father told me it was the first time in years he felt his family belonged somewhere. I didn't say much, just nodded, but inside something loosened. Not long after, I got a letter from Kayla, 3 pages handwritten. She wrote about her childhood, about watching her parents fight over property, about her hunger for security. She admitted she'd handled things badly, though she never quite apologized. She asked if we could find a way forward. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer with the firewood receipts. Some things could wait. Spring came in full. One afternoon, a knock came at the cabin door. I opened it to find Mark standing there alone. His shoulders slumped, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. "Dad," he said, voice quieter than I'd heard in years. "I heard about what you're doing here, with the vets. I think it's good." We stood in silence for a moment, the thawing lake glittering through the trees. "I'm not here to ask for anything," he added. "Just to say, I'm sorry." It wasn't enough to undo what had been done. But it was a start. After he left, I walked back down to the dock. The ice was breaking into shards that sparkled under the sun. I thought about the Christmas morning when all this began, about the empty table and the envelope that had once felt like an ending. Now I saw it for what it was, the beginning. The revenge had been quiet, legal, steady. But the real victory wasn't in what I kept from them. It was in what I built. The cabin wasn't just safe. It had become something bigger than me, something that would last. And for the first time in a long time, I felt peace. So here's what I've learned, and maybe it's worth passing on. Life will test you. Sometimes it'll be your own blood trying to take what you've worked for. But if you stand firm, if you plan ahead, if you lean on the right people, you can hold on to your dignity and your freedom. More than that, you can turn the fight into something meaningful. I didn't win by shouting or by force. I won by patience, by proof, by remembering who I was, even when others tried to write me off. So to anyone listening, don't let anyone erase you. Protect what matters. And if you can build something that will outlast even the hardest winters. If this story moved you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, because sometimes the stories we share are what keep us standing. The lake lapped softly against the dock. Somewhere out in the distance, a loon called. And I knew Lila would be proud.